Grafton West Virginia, America's True Gateway to the West, by Robert Allen Burton. I grew up as a West Virginian. I've traveled through every state in the Union except for Hawaii. This great nation has many diverse and dazzling cities and a multitude of natural wonders, and I feel blessed to have seen so much of it. Yet with all the beauty and excitement I found elsewhere, my fondness of my home state has nonetheless increased. But one constant source of annoyance has dogged me while traveling out of state. When asked where I'm from, I tell people I'm from West Virginia. But time and time again, this is met with responses such as, "So what's Virginia like? And what brings you here from Virginia?" I can't be angry at these well-meaning people for their questions asked out of ignorance, so partially my bitterness is directed towards their geography teachers that failed to instill in them the knowledge that West Virginia and Virginia are two completely different states. Every bit as different as Pennsylvania is from New York and Florida is from Georgia. But I had also directed another portion of resentment toward the founding legislatures of this state who voted for the name of West Virginia over the alternative option, Kanawha. That is until I moved to the town of Grafton, West Virginia. I'm sure that you've heard this said, the importance of learning history is to avoid repeating past mistakes. Well, I was convinced that one of those past mistakes was choosing the name West Virginia over the name assigned to this land territory by the natives, Kanawha. In fact, for a brief period while traveling through other states, a West Virginian friend and I agreed that when asked, "Where are you from?" we would answer Kanawha. But this answer was always followed with another question, "Where's that?" And ultimately the answer West Virginia would become necessary anyway, so our grassroots attempt to change the name of the state was abandoned. Soon after becoming a resident of Grafton, I gained a whole new perspective on this issue. Actually, it was my 13-year-old son who pointed out to me that Grafton has the feel of a Western town, and he referenced examples of Western wear worn by a few citizens. Main Street architecture also presents everything you would expect from an idealistic Western town. I began to re-examine what I understood about the history of Grafton, and I realized that even geographically speaking, Grafton is a Western town. Now you may be thinking, Grafton is not geographically west. It's not even the Midwest. It's the Mid-Atlantic. But if you're willing to take a brief journey back in time to the years just prior to the foundation of this great nation, I do believe you shall be persuaded. Once upon a time, in 1748, there was a young man named George Washington. At 16 years of age, he took part in a surveying expedition on behalf of Lord Thomas Fairfax. This trip west took Washington to the Appalachian frontier on what he called the worst road ever rode by man or beast. This epic adventure led Washington into the frontier and to the base of the Eastern Continental Divide. This ridgeline presented a difficult barrier for European explorers and settlers. This is especially true at the portion of the ridgeline Washington visited. But this route was more direct, straight west from Annapolis, Maryland. It was discovered that precipitation which falls on the east side of the Continental Divide flows towards the East Coast Atlantic, and that which falls on the western side flows towards the Mississippi and the Gulf of Mexico. Due to treaties between England and the indigenous peoples, these highlands that deeply affected young George Washington remained Indian territory. Strengthened and made bold, in part by his adventures as a surveyor, George Washington grew into a mighty leader, and before the onset of the Revolutionary War, he traveled beyond the Continental Divide and down the Ohio River. Yet he did so by traveling through Pennsylvania, across mountains less large and rugged than the ones he witnessed as a teenager when he approached what is now known as West Virginia. When George Washington became president, he commissioned the construction of national roads, and one of those is a road now known as U.S. Route 50. It runs through the very terrain that Washington traveled as a teenager with the Fairfax surveying team. When completed, it extended all the way from Annapolis, Maryland to San Francisco, California. Although Washington did not live to see its completion, he did travel the route as far as Mount Storm, which is at the crest of the Continental Divide. Fittingly, Route 50 got the nickname the George Washington Highway. Everyone in Grafton, West Virginia is familiar with Route 50. It was there before Grafton became a town. Some of its mountain passes follow ancient Native American trails, and it was traveled by horse and buggies for longer than it has thus far been traveled by automobiles. U.S. Route 50 passes through such places as St. Louis, Missouri, Dodge City, Kansas, and Carson City, Nevada, en route to the West Coast, and it is the road that carried prospectors to San Francisco during the gold rush of 1849. As the gold and its value as wealth made its way back east, it left its mark along Route 50 in the form of majestic banks and other marvels of stone architecture. In the 3 ensuing decades, another stone from the earth became valued throughout the industrial world: coal. Coal powered everything during those years, from factories to steamboats, but most importantly, in regards to the western expanse of the United States, the steam locomotive. The railroad replaced the horse and buggy as the method of travel for the post-pioneers, and tracks were laid adjacent to Route 50. Towns blossomed alongside of the tracks, and pioneer communities soon bloomed into cities. One of those new cities was Grafton, which was especially important because it was a junction point between railways running east and west, fueling the western expanse, and rails from the south carrying coal to fuel the growth of the nation and its various industries, which quickly made the United States a global superpower. And it was right there, in the midst of this exciting time of American history, that West Virginia became a state and downtown Grafton began to take shape. This era is known worldwide as the American Old West. Structurally speaking, Grafton is like a time capsule to that long-gone era of western expanse and railroad boomtowns. The monumental B&O Railroad Station and the adjacent Willard Hotel stand as shining testament of Grafton's former vitality. For half a century, Main Street Grafton was bustling. Imagine it's 1900. You left the colonial East Coast via train. Ascending the Allegheny Mountains, you steamed down the other side into a deep wilderness and ultimately arrived at a booming town on the western frontier, complete with saloons, a theater, and deluxe accommodations. To the travelers of this era, Grafton was the first stop into the western frontier, thus the original gateway to the west. Indeed, upon becoming a citizen of Grafton, I have learned why the word west was and is important to the name of this state, not only because of what it has meant to the past, but what it can be to the future. The original heyday of downtown Grafton was short-lived because the automobile soon came along and fewer people traveled by train. Automobiles traveling east and west on Route 50 bypassed downtown Grafton and missed out on its unique micro-majesty. All businesses suffered and slowly many closed. Eventually, the interstate highway system made even Route 50, George Washington's frontier highway, rarely used for cross-country travel. Grafton offers a glimpse into the past, but it is also a potential keyhole to a great future for West Virginia tourism. With its monumental train station and hotel vacant, but very much intact, Grafton, West Virginia is ripe for renaissance. A few new businesses have now taken root and joined with the old, and a growth spurt in the arts is already evident. If the railway was to reopen to passenger trains, Easterners would no doubt flock for an opportunity to ride over the Continental Divide for a taste of the Old West and to help forge a new West. But until then, I'll just consider myself lucky to be in on one of America's best-kept secrets.